So guys, I really want to go back to my tough videos. And tough videos means I talk about, things in my life or things that, have happened to me that were like, really difficult and really like, tough, or, how I was raised. And, as I've said that, what I'll say is that if I do talk about like how I was raised or my childhood or other things like that, I have a lot of skeletons in my closet. I've done a lot of good things and bad things with my life. I'm not perfect. And, whenever I talk to you guys, I want you to understand that, so if I'm like talking about, how I was raised or whatever, or how, somebody's bullied me or harassed me or whatever, I'll fully say that, I'm not perfect, and I definitely don't aim to be a hypocrite. I aim to be a better person. So in this episode, I do want to talk about respectful being taught respect and disrespect. And what that means is that a lot of people have been raised with a mentality that, being in a family is like a caste system. And that just means that the parents are to be respected, honor thy father, honor thy mother, but the children are not to be respected. And I'll give you some classic examples that I remember. We had a dog. And what happened was my parents would always want us to walk the dog. And my dad would always tell me stories like, okay, when he was a kid, his stepfather would wake him up in the middle of the night to walk the dog and whatever. So I remember like, there were like things that I didn't like how the dog that we had would just go to the bathroom in the house many times because when he got older. And my parents would be like, no, you got to walk him extra, Or the dog was jumping or hopping around. He'd be like, okay, that just means the dog wants to be walked. Or there were situations like, the dog, went to the bathroom in the house or whatever, the dog would move into my room or whatever, just to sleep overnight because the dog had an issue yelping and howling and whatever because it had separation anxiety. So I remember when I went to college, and one of the stories that happened was that, because the dog had an issue of yelping and howling, and the way to resolve that was for the dog to stay in my room if I was home. So the first thing that happened was, my parents told me that one of them just got fed up with the dog. So he picked up the dog while the dog was in the dog crate and threw him down a flight of stairs. And the dog was forced to sleep in the garage for, about like a half of a year. So it learned that, you don't run the household, you don't run the family, we're not bowing to the will of this English Springer Spaniel. So, again, it's hypocritical because that says, okay, if a parent doesn't like the dog and the dog has behavioral issues, the parent can initiate animal abuse, the parent can initiate control through abuse. But if a kid does that, maybe the parent will will discipline the kid the same way the kid is disciplining the dog if the kid does abuse, really. But that's a clear double standard because, it may not be, parent to father to son, but it was how a parent would reinforce that I show respect to the dog. I bow down to the dog's will. The dog needs to be walked extra, or the dog wants to walk because it gets walked because it's excited, or the dog needs to be moved into my room because the dog has an issue of howling and yelping and whatever because it has separation anxiety. It's interesting when I go to college and I'm not there that instead of just saying, okay, well, I'm going to carry that over and walk the dog maybe in the middle of the night, or maybe I'm going to move the dog into the parents' bedroom. No, the parents say, nope, fuck that. I'm going to throw the dog down a flight of stairs while it's in its crate, really, and it's rolling and being crashed around, bouncing around the crate because of the momentum. And the dog sleeps in the garage for like 6 or 7 months till it learns no one's going to come. You need to get your shit together. So that's like my first example that I have. Another example that I have is that I remember, one time, it was Christmas dinner and my dad had a bunch of cold cuts, like a spread of cold cuts, like salami, ham, cheese, and a couple other things. And I remember I took the rule in my house is that when you make a sandwich, you can only put on 2 slices of cold cuts, So I remember forgetting that. My dad slapped me in the face and he was kind of with big eyes and stuff like that. And I really thought about throwing over the kitchen table or whatever, because I was also taught that, a lot really, which is, parents can smack you anytime, or, you're taking you're taking like 3 slices of cold cuts, you're a big fat glutton. But I had an older brother, and he was a big old glutton. My parents didn't really care about how much, he scorfed and whatever. So yeah, it was always that. And I also understood that my dad was hit as a kid, really, a lot. And I remember, I think my dad said that one time, one rule in this house was that if, people are leaving, or he would always have to remember to bring down a piece of luggage. And if he didn't do that, he'd get smacked or whatever. So I understand it's generational trauma, but it's almost like, again, you just don't hit your kids, randomly, or you look at the offenses that you have, really, because it's almost like, as I said, it teaches okay, everybody else is allowed to eat as much as they want to, but when it comes to me, Byron, I weighed maybe around 100 pounds. Sometimes I would have headaches because I wasn't being fed that well. Not saying that I was intentionally malnourished. It was just I had a very high metabolism. But it's okay, well, I'm forced to run track. I have a part-time job. You know what, I'm doing all this stuff in school, and I'm not allowed to have 3 slices of cold cuts. I get smacked for that. But my fat ass brother, you know what, he doesn't play any sports. He had a weight issue. He actually, at that time, he's gone to the doctor for, and the doctors kind of always looked at him with big eyes saying, okay, Bubba, you need to stop eating, But, because my brother was older and he was a house guest, he was allowed to kind of scorf what he wanted, really, So it's always, really interesting how we're a little bit hypocritical. Or I had a younger brother, and he had a very horrible eating habit. He would just douse, his, with all of his food with ketchup and whatever, and that kind of smack should have been reserved for him, because, he's going to learn that, okay, he's going to learn unhealthy eating habits, So it's unfortunate when things are different for the middle child. And then I also will say that I remember, another time, how should I kind of say this, that I remember, when I went to Chowder Pot with my parents one time, they had these good honey buns. And I remember how I reached for one, my dad slapped me in the face, and he said, you're going to go to the bathroom and you're going to wash your hands. And then everybody else, wasn't told the exact same thing, and had all of it, and I had nothing really. And it kind of just, was another thing about, as I said before, double standards. And I also would say that another example that I do have for you guys is, what happened when I went on a planetarium field trip, that I remember, I have 2 fathers. I'm going to call them, Chris and Bob. So, not their names, but I remember Chris was actually, taking me to the planetarium. And what happened was, we were told that he was told that, he has to buy me dinner, that there's no stop there. He had to buy me dinner. We're gonna stop at McDonald's. So I remember my father, Chris, he was actually okay, he didn't have any cash on him. So he went to an ATM, and the ATM only gave out $20 bills. He did not it was not separated into fives. And then he said to me, you know what, Byron, if you spend more than $5, I'm gonna break your fucking hands. You know what, that $20, that's enough to feed the family for an entire, week, So, what a cheap bastard. And both my parents together made close to $150,000 or $200,000. But you're more concerned that your son, who is skinny as a rail, has headaches sometimes because, he's, underfed, or has a very high metabolism. Oh, well, I'm going to knock my kid's ass out for spending more than $5. Imagine if I told Mr. Evans and a few other people there that my dad said or even if I told the McDonald's worker, oh, my dad's going to knock my ass out, or he's threatening to breathe, or he's going to break my hand for spending more than $5. And I was also told that the family food budget is all that, $20 together. Good parenting, so, but yeah, but how many times have I've kind of seen, when, my brother has birthday parties and, my parents are spending thousands of dollars, or, or sometimes, if my brother, younger brother, wants to go to a restaurant, that happens really. So the money's always being spent on them really, and sometimes money was spent on me, and I've remember one time I did something really stupid in my 20s, and my parents had to spend, money to help to get me out of a jam, really, So it's just one of those things too that I understand that, there's times too when I've done stupid shit, or when my parents have had to put in extra money or extra help, really, and I've needed, counseling and other things growing up. So there's some expenses that came with me. But, I remember, like, to get back to that story, is that, after that happened, I remember, like, Chris also driving me to the planetarium after going to the ATM, and then I think somebody cut him off, and he was like, Jesus fucking Christ, fuck this, fuck that, dropped me off the planetarium. And then I remember, like, Bob drove me home, and then and I told, like, Bob was like, why are you in a bad mood? And I was talking a little bit about my father, Charles, and it's like saying, oh, no, fuck my father, I'm Chris. And then my father, and I said, like, I think he really needs therapy, because it seems like every single time he speaks, it's like Jesus fucking Christ, or fuck this, fuck that, and all that stuff. And I remember my other father, Bob, hitting the brakes, said, like, you never ever talk about his mental health or whatever. I'm your father. I can talk about your mental health all I want to, but you will never ever talk about, both of our mental health. It goes down to the biblical saying of honor thy father. But, part of honor thy father is, fuck thy kid, or disrespect thy kid, So it's not good when we're taught that. And I also will talk about my final example, which is, my father, Bob. He ran for governor of Connecticut, and he was doing commercials mentioning that all of his kids are black. I'm actually mixed race. My older brother's mixed race. My younger brother possibly is African American. Me and my brother got DNA tests and all that, really. So we're actually more Native American than African American, and we're actually over 50% white. But we've been treated like black kids, and my parents kind of have like this white savior mentality. But I remember, like, my dad also mentioning that he raised 2 kids with autism. I'm not autistic. I was misdiagnosed. But also too, my aunt Margaret, his aunt, my great aunt Margaret, she had breast cancer. She had a breast remove. She's bald. If I ever, like, was running for governor and I was showing pictures of her or pictures of her chest to say, okay, breast cancer is a serious issue, like I've said, my dad would beat my ass through to that. Or what would happen if I mentioned that I want to do parenting classes, because then I'll talk about how my grandmother used to hit my father and she was an alcoholic, and other family things. Or I can talk about, just other things that about our family or whatever, So, or again, I'm now more conservative than Democratic, and I could easily go on CNN as a politician, and I could be like, okay, I grew up in a gay household and all the things that were kind of weird about that. I remember one time in middle school, my father, Chris, had a thing for slapping me in the butt and chuckling and all that stuff. Or I remember how my other father, Bob, would assume in high school that I was a closet homosexual. Or I remember, like, one of my therapists saying that, my dad talked to him and thought that I was a closet gay man, really. That old stereotype of, gay people want to make sure their kids become gay like them as well, really. So there's a lot of times when, where I could take platforms and I could talk about, or I can be a conservative politician, and one of my talking points could be like how it was traumatizing to live in a house of gay people. A lot of conservatives would love that. A lot of conservatives will eat that up. It goes against the homophobic propaganda, but I would not do that, because, there are a lot of, I respect all people, it doesn't matter your sexual orientation. But, again, it seems like, but that was really hurtful. And I remember having depression and doing self-destructive things and messing up my own life. And I also will say that, I remember, like, starting Tough Videos, and I remember starting a lot of other things where I would talk badly about my family. But it did kind of come down to, what I was kind of taught, really. It seems like, when my dad talks about my mental health issues, it seems like, when my parents disrespect me and whatever, I have to kind of be a humble little boy. And I also remember seeing a psychiatrist, and his mentality is, oh, well, your father has his, he has his issues, you got to figure out a way to move on, Byron. And, that's not always good, because, as I said, it always teaches that mentality of it's always like, whenever I do something offensive, I'm the one with the problem. I'm the one that needs to be scrutinized. But when other people hurt me or offend me or disrespect me, I'm the one who has to be the better man. It's, my behavior gets criticized, but how other people treat me does not get criticized, and that was kind of like my therapy relationship, spend all that time being a hardworking black man, and getting a better job, because my therapist also taught me that as well, when response to bullying or disrespect or my parents being a little ignorant or a little politically incorrect, mind your father, possibly settle down, have a bunch of kids, be a role model black man, and don't be another black man going to jail. I was kind of taught that by my therapist, but yeah, those things are not good, because we should not be teaching double standards with respect. Like, parents should be respectful. Parents should expect their children to be respectful, and then parents are disrespectful to their kids, really. And then also, hitting kids is never right. I do understand that we do also live in a time where we have issues with both parents being too patient with their children, and sometimes a little smack in the face is all right. But I think where I lies in the middle ground. I kind of like what they did in Good Times, where Jamie Olmos, the character, he would beat his kids with a belt, but he also would sit down and talk to his kids about, why that happened and other things like that. I think sometimes maybe that is a little necessary to teach kids, you don't run free and wild. But also, if you're doing it over minor infractions like smacking a kid because they take one extra piece of salami, or, you have a kid who, you give them like $20 and you want them to spend $5 of it, they may have an issue with spending more, but you may say, okay, if you spend more, you're grounded or whatever, because, you know what, I know how you have an issue with spending money, or when I give you money, you go crazy with it. That would be more appropriate. But because it does come down to that, like, I think there should have been better things said to me. But also, part of being a good parent is having emotional maturity, and that was not something that I grew up with. That was not a household that I had. So emotional maturity is very important. But also, as I said, that, one of the reasons why I'm single, one of the reasons why I don't want to have a kid, one of the reasons why I'll say the worst day of my life is that if I ever had a girlfriend and I ever got her pregnant, I would be so angry. I'll be like, oh my God, I have a fucking brat for the next 20 years of my life. I got a little asshole. The worst day of my life is when my kid's born. The reason why I would feel that way is because I'll be like, okay, how do I become a parent? Am I going to be this screaming, yelling, throwing furniture, emotionally abusive asshole that I've kind of dealt with growing up at certain points, really, not every single point. I would, like I said, the worst day of my life would be the day that I have a child. Is the day that a woman, gives birth to my kid. Because I'll be like, now I have a fucking brat and a kid that I hate, because I was kind of raised with that philosophy, fuck the kids. Kids are inconveniences. There's something to smack. There's something to put a lot of chores on, and all that shit, really, So I don't want to be another generation of just really having kids and then passing down that emotional abuse and all that. That's not something that I want, and that's one of the reasons why, as I said, I don't even want kids. And then the other thing is that antisocial disorder runs in my genetics, so I don't want to have that. And then also, if you're raised by people who have some antisocial tendencies or some sociopathic tendencies or generational trauma, it's not going to be a good combination, really, because I don't want to have a kid that has a big heart and then they learn to be heartless because I hurt them so much, really. I just want to break that cycle. But that's also the another thing that happens. It teaches kids, when they're brought up with disrespect and being disrespected by their parents, they're not going to want to have families, or they're going to be like, okay, fuck, now I have a kid, now I'm going to be an asshole to my kid, and be verbally abusive for the next 20 years. 18, 20 years, to kind of be like, okay, you're not wanted, you're an inconvenience, I hate you, you're something to be screamed at, every single day, because of all the pressure having a child puts on the family. Um, the other thing too is that I dealt with a lot of workplace bullying and violence, and I was also raised just like my biological father. I was adopted, but just like my biological father, he was raised in the household of you get a beating for not standing up for yourself. In my household, if I ever got into a fight, I know like my parents would yell and scream and curse and flip out really. So I was always intimidated into walking away like a little like a little sissy and being like, the better, if somebody's beating you up or somebody wants to pick a fight with you, the smart thing to do is just to walk away like Rod and Todd Flanders, like a little sissy boy. And I understand that, sometimes that's appropriate, but if you do that every single time, that's not good. Like I worked at a job called Conway and I had a boss. The store's robbed by its own security guards. The police almost shot me. I had PTSD. My boss laughed at the fact that I was almost shot dead by the police. When my grandmother died, my boss said, it's a damn shame you can't work Friday. He also changed my schedule. So that way when I wasn't there Friday, he said that I was supposed to work the weekend, but he didn't tell me just to be vindictive. And then he wanted to suspend me for a week because he changed my schedule without telling me or whatever, knowing that I wouldn't be there Friday. And then also, he said he sees his grandmother more often. So he insulted my grandmother. He tried to suspend me to go to my grandmother's funeral. I remember the first day of work, I was throwing up in the street for the level of bullying that I was receiving. He made fun of the fact that I was almost murdered by the police. He would yell and scream or sometimes throw things at me, and I actually saw him as a father figure because he reminded me of my dad and the level of disrespect that my father has given me. So when you raise your kids to be treated like they're stupid and be treated like, anybody can disrespect them, it evolves into other relationships, or even like when I was in the 40-hour film project, I met many mean filmmakers and many just mean racist people, and I've learned to kind of tolerate that because one of the reasons why I don't stand up for myself, because I was always raised with, okay, you have two options. You can throw furniture and smash things and be out of control crazy asshole, or you can just hold, or just just harbor your pain really, because I was never really taught any type of emotional management or emotional maturity because of how I was raised really. So, we always have to think about how we're raising our kids, and we always have to think about the fact of the impact that we have really. And I mean, I hate saying this, but definitely, I learned a lot about respect and hard work and being cultured from my adopted parents, but I was not raised in any constructive way, any form of social maturity. And that comes down with what I'm talking about, which is being taught that adults are to respect kids, but also children are raised to respect adults, but adults can disrespect children, which is a very bad form of parenting.